Thank you so much for your time and for agreeing to speak with us.
Yes.
It's such a pleasure to be here. People like me came all the way from Nigeria
Yes.
for this summit, representing an Africa-based media organization. One of the questions, not just amongst Nigerian audiences, but even across Africa, and I know because we polled that group, has been what can we say is the single most important significance of this summit?
It's hard to say there's just one thing, but if I were going to capture it, it is a partnership to address global issues and concerns. And let me explain further. What that means is that our head of state, our president, and heads of state, heads of government who are here, and their delegations, are looking at the pressing issues in our globe right now. So what's being discussed here are issues of health, pandemics, climate change, food security, peace and security, and governance. And that's not just on the continent of Africa, although we're engaging with governments to talk about how we partner and assist and work together in their countries, but also globally. How do we, without Africa, there will be no change. Africa is increasingly important and an indispensable partner in order to address the issues of our time, whether that's questions of sovereignty, Russia and Ukraine, which also affects food security, whether it's questions of safeguarding our oceans. All of these things affect all of us, whether you're in Nigeria and looking at fish supplies off the coast, or whether you're in the west coast of the United States and looking at our fisheries.
Thank you. Now, we know how expensive organizing an event like this can be for the US, of course, and for all of the stakeholders coming from all of the different parts of Africa. And this is not the first time that a very high-level policy dialogue would hold, either here in the US or anywhere in the world. In terms of how the words and the actions, in terms of how we execute some of the lofty aspirations
Sure.
here at the summit, follow through. I'm now speaking more to the history of events like this.
Right.
What would you say this 2022 US Africa Leaders Summit is doing differently in order to match words with actions? Because we
Sure.
know that there's like huge commitments have been made in the past. There's been promises made in the past that have not been met yet, and we see here today there are like new promises and new commitments. What can you say towards that? Like, how do you expect this to go in terms of matching words with actions?
Sure, that's a very good question. Let me give you a couple of examples specifically. One is there's been a real focus in our first 2 days on the diaspora. So we had last night, Secretary Blinken hosted what was called the Innovators Forum, which showed young entrepreneurs from the continent also engaging with young members of the diaspora here in business development and creative industries. And what we're going to see is an announcement of the Diaspora Council. So the president is looking at ways in which we can have a structure put in place which will ensure that in the years of moving forward, this does not go away. It's not a one-time meeting, but rather that within the U.S. government there is a focal point for diaspora issues. So that's one example. Another example is that there will be also an announcement of structures that are put in place for implementation. So when people get on the planes and go home, we will have a structure here. We will announce who will be leading this soon. Not at my level, higher up. But the responsibility there will be to do exactly what you're talking about, which is to say, what have we done? How are we achieving what we've talked about? And ensuring that we hit the marks that we've set for ourselves together.
I really must thank you. Personally, I've found this to be a very well organized event. However, I want to share something that's more of a feedback that I received on my way in here. I happened to walk into this building together with the foreign minister of Sierra Leone, and he was very vocal about and expressed his pleasure about the fact that there weren't any directions to the Walter E. Convention Center. There was very little to no provisions made to receive the diplomats that came from like the different locations. Do you see any gaps in the logistics that was put together for these events? And also, even speaking towards reciprocity with Africa, I want to know if there was any arrangements to sort of grant visa waivers, maybe for the press or for some of the guests that were coming from Africa.
So you never disagree with a guest, but let me say that I personally spent 7 hours out at Andrews, Joint Air Force Base Andrews, welcoming delegations off the airplane. They were welcomed into motorcades, in which we provided limousines for the heads of government and heads of state, and we also escorted all of the delegations to the center. So I'm not sure what might have happened in one case, but I do know that we had motorcades for every single delegation to come to the center, and those were organized ahead of time, and those did work. So let me just leave it there. We're so pleased that people have come. I'm getting great feedback. When you have 49 delegations, I'm sure that there are certain things which we will look at, but generally speaking, I think we're all incredibly pleased at the number of delegations that came, how we've received them, and how successful the first day has been.
My last question, of course, day one has wrapped up and come to an end. What would you say was the highlight of your day today?
You know, there were a number of highlights. I would say that probably, one of them was the what we call the 3D event. So that's Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin, and Administrator Power meeting with the presidents of Mozambique, of Somalia, and of Niger, and speaking about how security issues are not just military. In fact, they are primarily questions of governance, of economic development, of addressing the aspirations of populations,
Right.
of coming together. And so having a format like that, where you have what we call the 3Ds, development, diplomacy, and defense, talk about these things, and to have very powerful presentations made by the 3 African heads of state about what they're trying to do to address the needs of the population. I think that was a highlight for me.
I thank you so much. This was very good to connect with you, and I hope that someday you would be in Nigeria and we can reciprocate this.
I spent the first 4 years of my life in Nigeria.
Beautiful. That's such an insight.
There we go.